This
the valley,
conference will now be recorded.
the Swauk subbasin was a major producer of fish. It had a lot of water. More recently, that is not the case, and we're seeing extreme low flow conditions. Anecdotally, there were dry conditions as recently as a few years ago. So we're just trying to correct that. As I mentioned, we have a couple of major project goals here: complete a preliminary design for that reach from the mouth of Swauk Creek up to the 1.6 mile point, and then conceptual designs from 1.6 miles upstream. The overarching goal here is to increase the quantity and quality of accessible habitat in Swauk Creek, both for fish passage, that would be adult Chinook and coho passage primarily, as well as resident fish, and then rearing habitat for all affected fish species. And in that case, we're looking at all resident fish, coho, Chinook, and steelhead as well. The other thing I really want to stress here is that we want to improve the ecological functions and enhance the prior work that other groups have done. Especially, we want to improve those conditions in drought years, and given the projected climate change scenarios. The projection is that the Swauk subbasin, not just the Swauk, the upper Yakima, will be shifting from a less snow-dominated to a more rain-dominated subbasin, or excuse me, area. And with more of that precipitation falling as rain, it means the water can leave the system sooner. And what we're trying to do is provide a measure of resiliency so that the lower end of Swauk Creek is not faced with dire conditions in the future. Additionally, we want to do it now rather than wait, because if we wait until we do have a drought or until the climate change scenarios take hold, at that point it's too late, and the amount of time it would take to put in a pipeline would lose us valuable time. I don't want to say multiple years, but would lose a significant time where we could be benefiting the creek. So we'll talk about some Swauk Creek discharge and highlight why we're doing this project. If you look until about the middle of or early July, this is at Lauderdale Junction, which is about 7.5 miles upstream from the mouth of Swauk Creek. And the amount of water up there is, it looks pretty good most of the time until you get to early July. And then you see this, just a really quick decline of the hydrograph. And then you see a bump there in 2006, especially in late October, mid to late October. That's when the rains would be returning. But basically what we're looking at here is we're left with a really low flow condition from early July into October, around mid-October. That by itself may not be bad if the water quality stayed okay, if it was in that range of usable habitat or ideal habitat for salmonids, that would be okay, but we know from some other efforts that water temperature increases and the dissolved oxygen starts to sag. When we really zoom in on that, we'll call it the quote-unquote summer-fall time period, you see that, again, that quick drop from mid-June until early July, the flows drop below 20 CFS relatively quickly, and then we're down into the single digits for August through the start of October and into mid-October. So again, if it was just the flow was dropping but the water was maintaining its temperature and the conditions were still good for fish, other than the flow, we would be, this may not be as dire a project, but with the flow dropping and realizing that that's a south-facing drainage, the water heats up, especially by the time it gets to the mouth. Remember, this is just Lauderdale Junction that we're seeing this really low flow condition. So that's 7.5 miles upstream. So by the time the water gets to the mouth, it's relatively warm and not great for fish. Here we have Swauk Creek discharge. This is just upstream of Lauderdale Junction. So what you're looking at here is the plot of basically where First Creek enters Swauk Creek. And again, you see that time period, that July, August, September time period, flows dropping below 5 CFS, really low flows. And the point I'm trying to make with this one, and that I want to remind everyone, is that From this point, this River Mile 8 in Swauk Creek downstream, there are still surface water diversions that come out of the creek. And so there's still water rights that can come out of the creek. Jumping downstream to Swauk Creek, just right upstream of the mouth, basically a stone's throw upstream from the mouth. Again, we see extremely low flows in that same time period, that mid-July into early October. And so the water at this point has had a chance to travel 7.5 miles from those other measurement points. So we're looking at water that potentially is warm. The oxygen begins to sag as the water heats up. It's spread out. It's not conducive to fish for rearing or for passage. And I want to point out also, if we go back, these Lauderdale Junction measurements were from the late 2010s, or excuse me, the late 2000s. And then these, the 8.0 River Mile measurements from late 2010s. And the same thing for the the 0.1 River Mile. So right there at the mouth is from 2015 to 19. So these are relatively recent measurements, and the significance of these is that there is in-stream flow. There's a large chunk of paper water that should be available as in-stream flow, and we're just not seeing it, which means that the conditions just are, the stream just can't support that much water, or does not deliver that much water to the mouth. Another question that was posed after the presentation, the initial presentation, was when we would be delivering water versus what life stages would benefit. This table is taken from the Columbia River In-Stream Atlas. Ideally, this project would deliver or be available to deliver water anywhere from April through the end of October until the KRD system is off. As the hydrograph indicates, the water in April, probably not necessary, but I want to caution the way I say that, because on any given year, especially in a drought year, water or flows in April or May can get extremely low, and especially in June, can get extremely low, and the water can start to heat up. And I'll point to that 2015 drought, which is a bit of an outlier right now, but 1 in 5 years in the Yakima Basin has turned out to be drought in the last 20 or 30 years. So it's not that much of an outlier. So the fish that we would really expect to be benefiting with increased flows near the mouth in that lower reach, we have adult in-migration of spring Chinook. We might expect to see some of that for fish that did not enter the system at high flows. Maybe some spawning benefit, although not extremely expected. Rearing, we would definitely expect benefits to spring Chinook rearing. Same thing for steelhead, benefits to steelhead rearing. Coho, we would also expect some potential benefits to in-stream adult moving into Swauk Creek. I want to be careful though and point out that we haven't really identified a bunch of fish that are moving into Swauk Creek, whether it's coho or spring Chinook, and that's just through the Patagus database. It doesn't mean they're not there, it just means that they're not being picked up via pit tags. Bull trout, could there be a benefit? I think the short answer is yes. At this point, we're not sure to what extent, but increasing flows and keeping the water temperature down would be good for any fish, really. So as I mentioned, what fish are benefiting if we increase the flows. Steelhead rearing, weighted usable area in that lower reach. Once the flow approaches 5 CFS, and if you remember, near the mouth, the flow is 5 CFS or less for basically a 2 to 3 month period. If we can get it above 5 CFS, we see a very quick jump in the amount of water available, or excuse me, the amount of habitat available from 5 up to 10 CFS. We get almost more than a doubling of habitat available. Similarly, for spring Chinook, we see a significant jump in rearing from that 5 CFS up to that 10 CFS mark. And I'm using that 10 CFS mark because we think that the pipeline, it would be designed to deliver anywhere from 0 up to 10 CFS. So 5 CFS is a nice midpoint. And so if we had 5 in stream and we were adding 5 more, we'd end up at 10. And so, for example, with the Chinook rearing here, we would expect to see that jump from, anywhere from about 500 units of available habitat up to nearly 1,000 units of usable habitat. Coho spawning. I'm not sure if the coho will spawn in lower Swauk Creek. I'm not sure if that's if the lack of spawning is a function of existing habitat conditions or just the conditions over time that have cut off that portion of the population that may have spawned in lower Swauk Creek. But similarly, add the water and we get a significant bump in the amount of habitat available. Jump through some pictures now. This is actually from just a month or so ago. This would be the location where water would be entering. What you can't see on the right side of the picture because it's buried in those in that riparian area there is a couple pipes that come out of the side of a hill. They go under a road, basically culverts that would allow the water to flow under the road that exists for Swauk Valley Ranch and into the creek. So this is the high flow conditions. The water, we have a couple of options there when we would be delivering water, obviously. It could be, just kind of naturally dispersed through that the riparian area or similar to other areas that KRD's delivered water. It could go into a, I'm going to call it a delivery box with a flume and a measuring gauge, so we always know how much water is exactly how much water is going into the creek. From 2010, these are low flow conditions. This is August of 2010. Again, there's some in-stream flow water here, so that's what you're seeing. This is extremely low water conditions. Again, the water temperatures we see in this lower end are elevated, especially in August through late July, from late July through early September. So while there is water there, it's really warm water. 2019 results and a later 2020 modeling effort indicated that water approaches anywhere from 22 to 24 degrees Celsius in the lower reaches of Swauk Creek. So really not great for fish. Presents an opportunity to improve conditions. Here's 2015. Keep in mind, again, there's in-stream flow that should be present in 2015, and this is during a drought conditions. And you can see the Yakima River there in the background. This is really low flow. I'm not sure the temperature of the water. I'm not sure the water temperatures were being kept in 2015. But I want to point out that even if adult fish could pass this, I'm not saying they can't, and I'm not saying they can because I'm not an adult fish. If there's sufficient flow for the fish to pass, the temperatures are such that we're not looking at just a 50 or 100-foot reach of Swauk Creek that would have elevated temperatures. We're looking at more like a mile plus of the lower end of Swauk Creek that would have these elevated temperatures. So it really, in our opinion, presents potentially a physical barrier because of just the low flow conditions, and then also a thermal barrier to fish passage. Here's the Swauk Creek at the mouth, September 10. You see the flows spreading out right before it goes in the river. All I can say here is the same type of issues, low flow, warm water. We have an opportunity, we think, through this project to improve that. Here you see the mouth, and I'm sorry, I'm blocking my own view of this. This October 2018. This is about as low as you will see it. October, we would expect, depending on the time in October, irrigators to begin shutting off, assuming the rains return. But again, we see extremely low flow conditions there where it enters the Yakima River. Now, a slightly different view, and if this presentation seems familiar, it's because I borrowed a lot of it from last year. What you're looking at is, this is a drone picture actually looking upstream, but on the right side of that picture, what you don't see is there's a canal that daylights, and there's a siphon over there. And that you're looking upstream into Swauk Creek, and that road that you're seeing is what takes you up to Swauk Valley Ranch. You see some decent riparian area through this picture. What you can't see is there's a buried pipeline, generally follows the road, and that's what takes the water up to the Swauk Valley Ranch. And this is the water that enters the pipeline. I wanted to bring this picture and use this picture because though I don't have the measurements for it, it looks like that's well oxygenated, well aerated water that would be pushing into that pipeline that we would be pushing upstream. So again, not only would we be producing water that is significantly cooler than the existing water in Swauk Creek, but it would also be water that's well oxygenated. And you might ask yourself, how do I know it's significantly cooler? Again, I mentioned this 2019-20 modeling effort. It showed that the water coming out of the Carity Canal is actually cooler through that low flow period than the water in Swauk Creek. And because there's such a small amount of water in Swauk Creek during that time period, adding a similar or even greater amount of water, basically doubling the amount of water in Swauk Creek, using the Carity water can actually cool the Swauk Creek water. So we think that's a huge benefit that, you know, it's not just about increasing the amount of water, it's also about improving water quality. One other point that I want to make is there was a lot of work taking place in Swauk Creek to improve the floodplain conditions, improve the amount of large woody material in stream. This is a picture from spring 2020. Sorry for the graininess here. But you can see the large structures in place, activated or involved with the water here. As the flows drop, these become less involved with the water. The water interacts with them less. However, they still provide some benefits. Again, what we're proposing here is that we would be improving flows in the low flow time of the year that would enhance the interactive effects from this large woody material. And that, folks, is what I have for you today. I want to take a second, though, and answer a couple questions if I can. And if folks have any other questions, feel free to ask. So these were the questions posed to me after the presentation, the sponsor presentation. So to what extent is the one major water user on First Creek using their water right? And I apologize if this comes off as in any way other than trying to be, you know, answered as directly as I can. But basically, they're using their water according to priority date and to the extent the water is available. And I've checked with the Department of Ecology, and basically the flows get extremely low. And there's a ratio, and I believe it's up to 6 CFS or so when that water is available in Swauk Creek. They use the full amount, and then they have a lower amount of percentage that they can use of every drop of water above approximately 6 CFS. And I believe it's somewhere around 28% or so. And I don't remember the exact numbers. So the point of this, that I guess the point I'm trying to make is, yes, they're using their water. A large portion of that water right actually, or the First Creek water is already in stream, designated as in stream flow. So. And then the next one, what is the ballpark estimate for the long-term cost of the build-out? Right now, ballpark estimate's about $5 million. Again, I want to point out, though, that this would replace the existing pipeline. It would provide for flexible delivery throughout the irrigation season. And so anywhere from 0 to 10 CFS. And I see I'm getting a number of questions there over in the chat. So I'll jump through this stuff. I've already addressed the next question. That's the timing of the water and how it benefits fish. And the last one, and actually that's it, is the pipeline question. And then why is this the best source of water? Basically because we do have some ongoing projects. And I'm gonna stop sharing here if I can figure out how. but I can't, so I'll just pop back up the presentation. We do have some ongoing projects, and when I say we, the in-stream flow practitioners in Swauk Creek. And so they have secured a bunch of water for in-stream flow. It's just that that water is more paper than anything right now. And so despite having a bunch of in-stream flow water that seems like it should be available, there's just not the water available. So this is the next best option. We'd love to get the natural stream flow available. There have been conversations with irrigators up there that are still using the water about buying water. It's always an option going forward. It's just that it doesn't seem like there's a lot of movement on that front right now. Just I want to get to some questions that are here in the chat. First question from Rachel Little: have you talked with irrigators about this project? If so, what was their response? So the only irrigator this would affect is the Swauk Valley Ranch. The ranch manager there is open to this project. It seems like they want to do positive things for the environment. Their management of the ranch seems extremely pro-environment. There's also a large conservation easement out there that I think this project aligns with. As far as KRD and their irrigators, I can't speak for KRD. What I can offer here is that KRD is extremely committed to projects that advance the integrated plan. This project would advance the goals of the integrated plan and builds off of the existing stream supplementation efforts that KRD has with Big, Little, and some other creeks in the upper Yakima Basin. Next question, can I show the locations of the current diversion points? Not easily. Not without opening a number of different programs and trying to pull up the map, but I can provide those and put those into a map. And I'm just making a note to myself in the actual proposal. I would ask for just a point of clarification, do you want all the points of diversion, or is there some type of limitation you'd like on that? And I'm asking that question because there are a lot of points of diversion that are for maybe for stock water, or which has a very low consumptive use, or for mining, which has I would argue, which has a negligible consumptive use. And the last question here from Jen Nelson, would the supplemental water delivered to Swauk Creek come from the same bucket of water as the Menashtesh, Tainum, Big, Little bucket? If so, how do we prioritize? And I believe what Jen is referring to there is that KRD has an ongoing stream supplementation project program that they're running to deliver water to the streams that Jen Nelson mentioned there. The short answer is likely yes, but that bucket of water, the amount of water available is increasing every year. How do we prioritize? Pretty much the same way that we prioritize right now, which is the stream of greatest biological need. Right now, we're able to run the program, or excuse me, I should say KRD is able to run the program that there isn't a shortage of water. But that's through the benevolence of some downstream irrigators in the way that KRD runs the program. I think in the future that we are rapidly pursuing and actively pursuing additional water to build that bucket larger so that it's not a problem going forward. So I would say it would be added to the list of streams that would receive water. It would be managed according to the way we manage it currently, which is adaptively and as it needs water. And I'm seeing a note from Elizabeth Butler, and which I can address with Elizabeth. Question from Jeanette Smith. How do you determine if natural dispersal delivery or delivery box? Thank you for that question. I should be careful with how I phrase that. Effectively, the delivery of the water would be done via pipeline, and it's really a question of whether it goes through the trees or whether it's through some sort of metered box. The metered box is quite honestly the preferred method. It's just easier to manage, and it's easier to measure the water. How do you determine if I brought up the natural dispersal delivery because that seems like it could be an option at that location. Again, this is all about the design portion of this, and so that would be part of the design elements. Jen Nelson asked, doesn't the existing pipe go into a pond that drains into Swauk? Sort of. The existing pipe does go into a pond or provides water into a pond, and that pond is my understanding is it's maintained for fire suppression and for emergencies. So yes, it does, but it goes up to that pipe or it goes up to that pond and it's up on a hillside. This would provide us what I'm proposing here, and the design would be basically following closer to the creek and using the existing roadway that's there, and rather than jumping in elevation, using a portion of the water, continuing to allow it to go into that pond for fire suppression, but then the rest of the water would follow a lower pipeline pathway. Okay, and a question from Becca Wassel. There has been basically, how did the discussions about supplementing Swauk Creek, how they came to agreement on that? Oh, that's a big question. The gist of it is there has been the questions about supplementing flow in terms of false attraction of fish, or the water quality, I think have been addressed through the KRD supplementation program, showing the benefits of the water in the other streams. It's a bit taxing on my memory, quite honestly, to recap how everyone came to an agreement on that. To do Swauk Creek, other than it's got a flow issue, KRD can do it. The impacts to the fish would be on the positive side of things rather than the negative side of things. I'm open if anyone else, Jen Nelson or anyone else has a recollection, be happy to open the floor to that.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. I think part of that was just a better understanding of the amount of water, and the timing and the temperatures were all a part of that. I think there was general consensus that, if it was under 10, we didn't expect to have, and especially during the timing, the straying concerns. So that's kind of my recollection. I had a follow-up question too. So we're going to be,
Sure.
Will we be replacing the pipe to the pond for fire suppression? And is that where they get their current KRD delivery for their irrigation water? And will they be still using their creek water after this is done?
So first, thank you for offering that bit of insight into the selection or how they went about deciding it was okay to supplement Swauk Creek. So the first question, I believe, and I want to make sure I address these, would we be replacing the pipeline that goes up to the pond? And here I'm going to make this bigger. That only if necessary. And that's actually not where they get their irrigation water currently. The existing line you see here, this orange line on the map, that's the approximate location of the pipeline as it exists today. In this area, so I'm not sure if you guys can see my pointer, but where you see the word Swauk Creek, just downstream of that 1.6 designation, that yellow dot. Just upstream of there, or just, I should say, upslope of there, is an irrigated hayfield. And so that's where they use their KRD water. And then the pipeline continues up to the pond that you see just up to the right of that, what would be that hayfield. And then the water, I believe I don't recall the year, 2015 or so, KRD did try to deliver water. It might actually have been more recently than that. It might have been 2019. And they tried to deliver it through the pond. The problem is that the existing infrastructure is just too small to deliver any meaningful water and still allow the ranch to get their water. And to my knowledge, they don't use any creek water at this point. Did I answer your questions, Jen?
I think so. Thank you.
Okay. And I'm getting a 5-minute warning. I got that a couple minutes ago. So I'll say, any other questions? No? Okay.
Yeah, I had a question.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I want to do just make sure people can hear me because my computer microphone's not working, but can people hear me? This is Pat.
Yeah, we all hear you.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, so we really don't have a lot of time, but I had a question about, I guess, the channel geomorphology or just the geology in general, and wondering about groundwater and you know, when you introduce water into this reach, is it, you know, is it going to actually be on the surface, and what we know about the geology of this reach. I've hiked up and down kind of the lower 2 miles quite a bit and have seen some areas where there's a lot of bedrock, and then I've seen some areas where there's some beaver dams and some really nice gravel. But just curious to your thoughts about, you know, getting water from point A to point B and the kind of the geology of the aquifer there.
So I want to be clear, I'm not a geologist, I'm not a geomorphologist, and I see Danielle Swauk says she can answer the geology questions. Yes, Danielle, please take it away. I'll say that we're confident that we can get the water from the delivery point to the mouth, but Danielle can explain why.
So thank you. Oops, yeah, I'm messing with my camera. We'll just leave that off, or not. I've got a little bit of a lag on this platform. So thank you, great questions. As you guys know, that there's a lot of differences in stream reaches through here. The Swauk Creek watershed has actually had pretty extensive hydrogeologic analysis because there was a batch of mitigated groundwater permits that were issued starting back in like 2011, I want to say. So a previous hydrogeologist, Anna Hazelton, did a really comprehensive look at it. And short story is that it is a alluvial basin that is constrained by a lot of bedrock. And so, you know, previously there's been some discussion about actually delivering the water to kind of the peripheral margins of the active floodplain area. And I've discouraged those and doing it, let me clarify, doing that as kind of an aquifer recharge project. I've actually discouraged those because I think that functionally speaking, the sediment types and such, you're not going to get the bang for the buck in the investment. So, you know, short answer on this is that I'm not anticipating that water delivery is going to sub out. I think it will stay within the reaches. And I think that, you know, just from a hydrogeologic perspective, we're not going to lose the water to other portions, or it's not going to sub out. So hopefully that answers your question. I'm happy to provide the supplemental materials that Ecology produced a few years ago if anyone's interested in looking into it further.
Thank you, Danielle. With that, this will probably be a good time to ask maybe one final question and then transition on to our next presentation. I also wanted to thank Justin. Just thank you for the amount of discussion that this generated and kind of making room for that back and forth. So that was great.
No problem.